Minutes after the hour. Good morning and welcome back to the program, Eastern Panhandle Talk Wednesday edition. Rob here along with David Welch. Good morning again, Dito.
And in my hands, I have a membership sponsor forum for the Police Unity Tour.
Police Unity Tour. You can go online to policeunitytourchapter4.com to make a donation. And I think it doesn't matter how you spell 4, whether you use IV, the number 4, or spell it out 4, it'll take you to the site.
I think so. Yeah, actually,
I've done this before.
It's actually the Roman numeral 4.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm sure you can probably get there. But what a
either way,
great time having those guys.
Now, our next guest. This is the guy. You remember the Army commercial? You know, people in the Army accomplish more by night. You know, before you wake up. Remember that commercial?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
More in a day than you do before you wake up. This is a guy that's accomplished so much in his career already. He served in the U.S. Army, I believe, as an officer too, and also a graduate of the same high school I went to, the same university I went to, and lived on Brownsville Road in a house that I walked by 1,000 times probably in my life. He was the president of the Allegheny County Council. They were responsible for passing Plan B, which brought the stadiums to Pittsburgh, new stadiums, Heinz Field, PNC Park.
I was living in Pittsburgh during the construction of those.
It's a contentious time, a contentious vote, too.
Right.
Bob Cranmer is his name. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm happy to be on the radio in wild and wonderful West Virginia.
Absolutely, baby.
With 2 Steeler fans, too.
That's right. Bob, you were, I think your final rank before you left the U.S. Army, was it captain?
Well, actually, I when I left active duty, I was a captain. I stayed in the reserves for a number of years, active reserves, until I went into politics, and I was a major at that point. So the Persian Gulf War, I was a major. Okay, so a major in the U.S. Army, a man who eventually became president of the Allegheny County. Was it a council or a commission at the time? Well, it was still 3 commissioners, so I was chairman of the Board of Commissioners in the county, and then we changed the form of government to an executive and a council.
Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, your chief of staff, your first year, turns out to be the father of my best friend in high school.
It's amazing. Amazing coincidence.
Jim Travato, who had the voice of God, I might add.
And I'm sure he still does.
You should have brought Jim into your house to cast out that demon.
What? Wow.
This guy was the lector at St. Sylvester's Church, and when I was a kid, I thought he was God because his voice was so full and deep. I honestly thought he was God.
I called him the irresistible force.
He was something. He's no longer with us, but he was a heck of a guy. Bob, your story is a very interesting one, certainly very intriguing, and it involves some people who I know as well. Father Ron Langwin was a guy that I knew from my days at KDKA Radio. I produced
another
his talk
impressive
show.
Guy.
Very impressive man, absolutely. And he was involved in the process of helping you to, would the proper word be exorcising the demon in your home?
Yes, it was a long, drawn-out battle and dealing with the thing, and then finally an exorcism, which didn't fully deal with it. I mean, it still took several months after that. It was a long process over 2 years.
Are you free and clear as of today in your house?
Yes, of the evil, yes. And as we were told, this was over 10 years ago, that every now and then something would happen, and that hopefully over a period of time that would just fade away. They called them echoes. Mm-hmm. And every now and then a little thing will happen here and there, but nothing like it was even when we moved in the house, when it was, paranormal activity was kind of almost a daily event then.
Did you believe in true evil before you encountered what you encountered in your house?
Well, certainly I had faith in God and, believed in the devil and so on. I certainly wasn't, really into any ghost thing or paranormal or anything. I was like, any other person, saw the movie The Exorcist and so on, and had a conceptual belief in evil and that the devil did exist and was present in the world, but certainly had no firsthand experience with it like I would come to experience later on when I dealt with this stuff first person. I say in the book it was like living with the invisible man. I mean, this wasn't some, ghost roaming around looking for, looking to rectify something that happened during a lifetime. This was a true demonic force, evil entity that after a while, it interacted with me.
I mean, it says, I'm reading an article online about your story, and you're quoted as saying it would scratch us, it would attack us, it would bite us. Can you elaborate
and knock
on
you
that?
down the steps, everything, yeah.
So I'm sure that I'm not the first person to say, Bob, really? I mean, this sounds a little far-fetched. I mean, believing in ghosts and haunted houses.
Well, again, I may make it clear whether people believe or not. This was not a ghost, and I've come to understand this world to a certain extent. A ghost is the spirit, for whatever reason, it hasn't gone on to its eternal destination. It's the spirit of a person who once lived. I mean, you can go to Gettysburg and see ghosts, but in this case, what we were dealing with, what we found, and think of the movie The Exorcist, we were dealing with a fallen angel, with a demon. And whether people believe it or not, it's in the Bible. When Satan was cast out of heaven, 1/3 of the angels went with him. And they're here. He was not cast into hell. They were cast down to the earth. And when you see heads being cut off, by ISIS and Nazis putting people in ovens and so on, pure evil is behind that.
Tell us the story about your house, Bob, and how you came about living in this house, because this is a house you were very much attracted to when you were a young kid.
Well, as we were talking before the show, Brentwood is, kind of a classic Leave It to Beaver type community, and the schools and the park and everything, and everybody walks to school, and there are no school buses, and there are tree-lined sidewalks and so on. So I was a kid back in the 1960s, and I would maybe 7 years old or so, back when little 7-year-olds could walk in town, not by themselves. I would walk by this house, as you probably did, all the time. And it always somewhat would reach out to me. I mean, it's a very classic, interesting, unique-looking house, big old Victorian with white pillars, 3-story. And I was always very, very intrigued with it. And I think going beyond the normal, I would stand in front of the house and just stare at it. I was later told by someone of authority in the Catholic diocese, it's called a Christian mystic, that I actually kind of had a relationship with the house, and what we would later face here, what I would face here, was somewhat predestined to happen. And even as a child, the evil that was in the house, there was something being laid out that I would have later come here with my family and deal with.
You mentioned in the book that the evil in the house actually spilled out into the community as well. Can you explain that a little bit? And it had to deal with the police force, the local government, and even mob activity.
Well, I just thought I didn't say that directly, but, I put that into the story because it kind of all wraps around this house. Back during the late 1800s, early 1900s, Brentwood was situated in such a way it's 7 miles away from the city where the steel mills were, and people who had money, the business owners, to get away from the valleys and the soot and the smoke and the immigrants and so on, moved out into what was then the country. 7 miles out when you're in a horse and wagon is a good little drive, and they built these big houses out along Brownsville Road, which at that point in time was the main road into Pittsburgh from all points south. It came from Route 40 in Brownsville, Pennsylvania, north to Pittsburgh. So you had these big houses lining Brownsville Road, and, the money came with them, and the good money came and the bad money came. And eventually, that I put that in the book because there was some evil things that took place in this house, and whether the house affected the community or the community affected what happened here, it is linked. And there was a kind of a culture of corruption in this little community There were, it's a mile and a half square, and for years there were 5 mob owned or affiliated nightclubs in this little town, and there was a whole number of gambling establishments and so on. So the setting I just thought was interesting, and I laid that out for the reader before I even addressed what took place in the house. And the history even goes back. The book starts with a story of an Indian massacre that took place basically right here in the front yard back in the late 1700s, where a family, 3 little girls and their mother, were killed in what is now my front yard, and they're buried there. And we felt that the evil associated with those killings affected what happened here as well.
Bob, much of the what was going on in this house after you moved in, and the story that gets told, was happening during your political career, when you are also, at the highest level of decision making in the county and the city of Pittsburgh. How was it sort of leaving the evil and then going to work and being a normal sort of political policy maker during the day, making some huge decisions at the time in Pittsburgh?
Well, I have to say that, after we moved in, probably within weeks, back in the late 80s, we had 4 little children at the time, 4, 3, 2, and a newborn. And my wife and my wife was, young and still in her mid-20s. And we came to the conclusion, it didn't take long before we realized that there was something in the house with us, that there was some type of spirit. But it didn't seem to be threatening. It was a curiosity. What do we do? We went out, we had a priest come and bless the house and so on. So we experienced paranormal activity for a number of years. And then eventually, as the kids got older, they did too. But it didn't seem to be that big of a deal once you weren't like freaked out by it and you realized that we just thought, okay, there's a ghost in the house, and as long as it doesn't bother us, we'll be okay. And you'd come down in the morning and all the lights would be on, or furniture would be moved, or water would be running in the sink. But it was funny how this unfolded over the years, and my children and my wife were affected by this thing, but at the time, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I didn't realize that their mental issues that they were experiencing, 2 of my sons and my wife, were being caused by this spirit that was in our house. So later on, when so to speak, everything hit the fan, and this thing no longer masked its intentions or its existence, then and the church got involved, I was able to kind of put a lot of pieces together and understand how this thing was working on our family for a number of years. And when I was in office, I wasn't home that much. I mean, I was like the governor of a small state, so I was out all the time. But while I was gone, it was working on the family.
Bob Cranmer is our guest, author of the book, The Demon of Brownsville Road. We will take our first commercial break and come back and start to get into some of that evil that was in his house and how they dealt with it and how they eventually expelled it as we continue along in this hour. 9:27. Rob here along with David Welch, and our guest in this hour is Bob Cranmer, author of the book The Demon of Brownsville Road. This is a true story of his time living in a house on Brownsville Road, not far from where I grew up, in fact. Bob and I knew many of the same people, though he is 7 years older than I. We graduated from the same high school, the same university, and Bob's chief of staff when he served as the chairman of the Board of Commissioners in Allegheny County was actually the father of my best friend growing up. So
now, Rob, were you aware of the evil in this house when you were there, or were you only made aware of it with this publishing of this book?
I would tell you that I was never in the house Bob now lives in and has owned since 1988, 89. Bob, is it?
Late 88, yeah.
Okay, but in Brentwood, you were aware of stories of this house, haunted house, so to speak. because this goes back, Bob, to the 30s. Am I right if I remember in reading from the book?
It does. And in fact, when we bought the house in early '89 in January, I worked for AT&T, and there was a guy, and I was explaining to him where I lived in the house I bought, and he said, "Oh, you bought the haunted house." and I said, what do you mean I bought the haunted house? And he said, "Well, my dad grew up in Brentwood back during the 1930s and lived right over the hill on Bookman Avenue. And he said it was empty for a time during the Depression, as I found out it was. The original owners lost the house for taxes. And he said, my father and his friend got in that house and something chased them out of it. He said, my father was never specific. It's just that they got out of that house very quickly. So when he told me that, and we're already experiencing things in the house, and not long after that, I'm in the front yard and I'm planting flowers, and I dig up a little metal box and I pull rosary beads out of the box. So I go and I call the guy we bought the house from, and all he would say to me is, "Please put them back where you found them." So,
Bob, you mentioned the Indian massacre that took place basically on your property there, and there's bodies buried there. But there was also another source of the evil. Your house was used essentially as an abortion clinic.
Well, there was this is one of those stories that persists in a community that, everyone kind of whispers about, at least the older people from, my generation and older, that there was this doctor who lived right down the street. And in fact, I verified he lived there. He was a pediatrician. He had a big practice down in the city in an area called Arlington. And apparently, not only being a pediatrician, he also would perform illegal abortions. Well, back then, any abortion was illegal, and needed a kind of a surreptitious secret place to do certain types of clientele. And this house, it's very easy access. The driveway wraps around to the back of the house so people can come and go and not be seen. And apparently, in the 20s and possibly, I think, into the 30s, we found out that he used one of the bedrooms in this house to practice his business. And one particular bedroom that ended up causing a lot of problems in the house was the room that he used. And so this story unfolds as I uncovered more and more of it, and all the pieces fit together, and that's it.
And there were many of the women who came in for the abortions didn't survive the abortion.
Well, yeah, we were told it was, and again, how we found this out, at least one woman died on the way to the hospital, collapsed from loss of blood or, some type of a botched procedure. But certainly a lot of babies died as well. So when you have that much, concentrated in one area, and I wrote what was uncovered and what we dealt with, and certainly I tried to discover what the source of all these problems were, and so we could better deal with it.
Do you write in the book about that point in time where your wife and you and your family makes that decision that we really need to go share this with the church? Can you walk us through what that was like?
Well, once things got really, I'll say, really crazy, and this was in the early 2000s. My kids were out of control. I mean, we thought that one of my sons was even possessed at the time. I mean, you have things flying through the air. I mean, it was like a nut house. So what do? I mean, we were evangelical Protestants at the time. We weren't Catholic. And who do you turn to? It's not like you can call the Ghostbusters, Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd. I wish I could have. So, I saw the movie The Exorcist, like many other people did, and the Catholic Church, claimed to have a a handle on this type of activity. And in fact, I initially started dealing with one priest from the Passionist Monastery here in Pittsburgh, and then a second priest. We did that for 2 months, and you'd think it would be dealt with. It got worse. And finally, my good friend at the time, who was still mayor of Pittsburgh, even though I was out of office, he said to me, Bob, and we were very close friends, still are, he said, I'm going to go see Bishop Worrell. So he went to see Bishop Worrell, now Cardinal Worrell, told him what was taking place, and called me and said, tonight at 7 o'clock, the priest is going to call you from the diocese. And in fact, Father Langwin called me, and that was the beginning of the kind of the direct involvement of the diocese, the bishop of the diocese, and the Catholic Church in general. And so they'd come out.
They took you seriously from the very minute you brought it to them. Very,
very seriously. In fact, I was surprised how quickly they did. We initially, and I don't mean to disparage my previous denominational faith, but I went initially to the pastor of our Christian church, and I tried to explain to him what was taking place in the house. And he raised his eyelids and said, he thought I was nuts. and then when I emphasized to him that I wasn't, he didn't know what to do. But when Father Langwin called, it was kind of like that scene in The Matrix where Neo is talking to Morpheus, and he told me, you have a decision to make. Take your family, sell that house, and move away and hope for the best to whoever buys it, or you can stay and we'll deal with this the best we can. And what really got raised my eyebrows was he said, in a year, we'll know if we're making progress. That's how bad it was.
You had some indication, Bob, you just mentioned there about you didn't want to sell it and dump it off on someone else like someone had done to you. And you had a bit of an indication when you bought the house from the couple who lived there that something wasn't quite right.
Yeah, well, that was clear at the time. Even when we were looking at the house, the people seemed very anxious to get out. And
I'll bet they did.
and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. I mean, I give them
the house guests weren't going with them, right?
Yeah, I give them a fictitious name in the book, and I don't blame them. They tried to deal with it. I think they thought they dealt with it. Since that time, one of their children has spoken out, their youngest son, who really was too young at the time to realize it. And he said, my parents would never do that. Well, first of all, I didn't even identify his parents, and I would have nothing to gain by, saying that what they did. But needless to say, my wife told me at the time, this house gives me the creeps. And it led me to ask him, is there anything wrong with this house? Now, you would think when you'd ask a question like that, he'd say, specify the plumbing, the electric, the roof, the furnace. No, his response was immediate. He said, no. In fact, we've had Mass in the living room 2 times. And that was an odd answer. Who has Mass in their house?
And this is a Catholic Mass he's talking about.
Yeah, Catholic Mass celebrated in the living room. Now, years later, when we had Mass, in every floor of the house, including the basement, I realized what that answer meant, because Mass being celebrated is a very powerful weapon against evil, and we employed that more times than I could ever count. But even when I called him about the rosary beads I found in the front yard, his response was very serious and direct without being specific. He said, please just put them back where you found them.
Was celebrating Mass in the house the one thing that seemed to work, or was it like a multi-complicated remedy that had to take? I mean, a whole strategy that had to take place.
There was a whole strategy that had to be, and I can tell you the truth. What we were doing, by the book, wasn't working. It was just aggravating this thing. It was making it worse. We would use crucifixes. I'd have all these rituals. I would have to say the rosary. It would tear the rosary beads apart. It would break the crucifixes in half. It just aggravated it. And it probably was a year before we got to the point where we, what we did made its existence as miserable as it was trying to make ours. And then from that point, it just became, kind of a battle of determination of who was going to win and who was going to stay. And, the priests would come every 7 to 10 days, but we had to deal with this on a daily basis. So I had a whole ritual of events or procedures that I would go through every day and interact with this thing. And people listening to me think this guy's out of his mind, but, it happened.
Before we went to the last break, something stuck in my head, which was that it seemed at first that it was the evil that was there was like in-laws that had moved in and were just inconvenient, running water, leaving the lights on. It was just something, if I understood correctly, something you kind of learned to live with. But through time, it got to be much different than that, and actually created some problems with your family members.
It did. In fact, that bedroom that I talked about, where the activity took place by the doctor, that ended up being my oldest son's bedroom. Now, he was 3 at the time, and then I found out from previous owners, at least the people who had owned the house from 1941 to 1971. I talked to a woman who's now deceased but grew up here. They never used that bedroom as a bedroom because she just said we didn't use that bedroom. We didn't sleep in that room. And that was the room that we put our son in. And probably for the first year, he wouldn't sleep in the room. He slept in the closet with the light on. And when we were having the house blessed, this was a really odd situation. Here I have a 3-year-old son, and we're going through the house with the priest, and he's, throwing holy water on the rooms and on the walls. And as he gets to that room, my 3-year-old son darts out in front of us, stands in front of the room, and refuses entry to the priest, that the priest cannot go in that room, it was strange what was causing him to do that. All these events, which I kind of logged in my memory, later made a lot of sense. And, we, for a time in 1994 and 1995, my wife and I were doing renovations in the master bedroom, and we moved into that bedroom and slept in it for probably, close to a year. And she had a nervous breakdown. Nervous breakdown in Allegheny General Hospital, psychiatric ward for several weeks. And after she came out and had treatment and so on, I had no idea, what caused this. She was completely normal, president of the school board, helped me in my political career. And then all of a sudden she's got a nervous breakdown. We move out of that bedroom, back into the master bedroom. She's completely normal again. It was just absolutely bizarre.
Bob Cranmer is our guest here at Eastern Panhandle Talk, author of the book, The Demon of Brownsville Road, his true story, a harrowing account of living in a possessed house, so to speak, in the suburban Pittsburgh area. It's 9:41. Back more with Bob after this. 9:43. Tomorrow on the program, James Daly, the chairman of the Board of Governors of West Virginia University, will be with us. And also Pete Mulford, Tiffany Lawrence from the United Way. You may have seen their picture in the paper today. A big donation from the Roach Energy Company, over $20,000 made. And we'll talk with them more about that tomorrow. Right now, our guest is from an area where I grew up, Brentwood, a suburb of Pittsburgh, right across the city line there. And the book is called The Demon of Brownsville Road. Bob Cranmer is our guest, former head of the Allegheny County Commission, and a man who was a major in the U.S. Army, served in the Persian Gulf, and also helped clean up corruption in the town where I grew up, which didn't make him a lot of friends among some of the local folks who were benefiting from that, but nevertheless, harrowing experience that he put down into his experiences into a book called The Demon of Brownsville Road.
That you read in 2 days, and only took you 2 days because you had to sleep.
I had to sleep in between. At some point along the way, a man's got to sleep.
You know, this is kind of a spoiler alert question, I guess, and probably unfair to ask, but what's the outcome of all this? Is it gone?
Well, the evil we did deal with, and it finally was expelled. I think the outcome of all this is just when I got done, I kept copious notes through this whole thing, and I had over 300 pages of notes, and I mean this whole story was so bizarre, and so beyond belief, but in fact it happened. And when it was over in 2006, again, my friend, the mayor of Pittsburgh, told me, and he's the guy who said, make sure you keep notes. I just didn't realize it would be for 2 years. He said, you got to write a book. And, so I did write the book. Getting it published ended up being a lot more of a challenge than writing the book. So it took me 7 years. And it's a story that I just felt I had to tell because this is true. And, whatever people believe or don't believe, I think this book, when you get done, it either forces you to make a decision or it reaffirms what you already believe, that good and evil and the supernatural are as real can be. It's all around us, and the devil and God and Jesus and the angels, it's all true.
Bob,
it's all true.
There was evidence of the being in your house. You could smell it at times. What was the smell like?
Well, that pillar of stench, as I called it, and the reason I called it a pillar of stench, it would move. It was like someone that really had bad breath or bad body odor. When you get close to them, you can smell it. You move away a foot or so, you can't smell it. So when I was right on top of it, I knew I was in front of it because I could smell it. That smell... It was kind of like a combination of burning rubber and like a sulfuric smell, like gunpowder burning. It kind of just gets in your nostrils and stays there. Very, very strong stench. It would not fill the entire room. The windows could be open and you would still smell it. And because it would move. And, during this process, I would hit it with holy water. And, we would have incense, and it's just a totally bizarre story how this thing would be present in certain bedrooms, and we couldn't use the rooms, and it would possess those rooms.
But when you said earlier, though, when you would do those kinds of things, your rituals, or whether it be mass or holy water, it would just make it worse. It would get madder than it was before. Yeah,
it would. It would go through the house and move furniture and, take big pictures and turn them sideways on the walls. As they say, it would, break crucifixes in half. It would take rosary beads. For those that are familiar with rosary beads, you pray them one bead at a time. It's like a little chain, beads linked with chains. It would actually fuse the chain links together.
Wow.
Wouldn't bend them. They would be fused together. So I couldn't use them. There was one time the beads actually fell apart in my hands onto the floor.
Bob, I was going to say, what other physical evidence did you see of this being in your home? I know you mentioned at one point in the book about bleeding walls.
Well, I just answered it would take different visual forms, and generally it would appear to my children in different ways. And I would say over the years, as many times it was seen, the best way to describe it was kind of like a Grim Reaper type looking, cloaked, horrific type, cynical face, and usually would appear at night. But my son saw it on one Saturday morning in the kitchen. He thought it was a person standing there. Later on, after the first year, when it looked like we had it, and we were kind of figuring out what we were going to do with this house, and we were kind of at our wits' end. It basically, I think it realized at that point it thought it had won, and it started to mimic the priests. When the priests would throw holy water on the walls, it threw this red blood-like substance, these big droplets that eventually started on the third floor and eventually made their way all the way down to the first floor over a period of weeks. But it threw this stuff, this liquid on the walls. People would say, what was it? I had it analyzed by several different laboratories. They could tell me what it was composed of, but they certainly couldn't tell me, like, okay, that's red, soda pop, or that's cleaning fluid or something. It just made no sense what it was, but nonetheless, it was there.
Bob Cranmer, our guest, author of the book, The Demon of Brownsville Road. So we've got about 7 minutes left, Bob. So how did the final battle go? How did you get this thing out of your house?
Well, they brought in a renowned exorcist from the Archdiocese of New York, Father James LaBarre, a young priest and an old priest, kind of like in the movie. He spent 3.5, 4 hours here in October of 2005, went through this long process of exorcising a house. Even after that, the thing was still here, but it was only in the basement. Some way it was confined to the basement. It was in a weakened state by then. Finally, we had a mass in the basement with one of the priests from the diocese, and it was funny. The way it set up during the mass, during the consecration portion of the mass, which is when the bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Jesus, a very holy part of the mass. It began to knock on the wall from the furnace room. After that mass, we confronted it in the basement, and finally it faded away. I expected it to end with some loud clap of thunder or something, but it just faded away as a black mist, and that was the end of it.
Whew. I mean, it's breathtaking. How did it change you, Bob? How are you different as a result? I mean, spiritually, emotionally, how are you a different man because of this experience?
I would say, I was your typical Bible carrying evangelical Christian who has all the answers. You got everything figured out. Here's the, what happened really challenged. I know that the rabbit hole goes a lot deeper, and the Bible says, resist the devil and the devil will flee from you. Well, this was a battle. This thing wasn't going anywhere for a long time, and all that Catholic hocus pocus turned out to be real. And things that I wasn't really familiar with, I came out of it with the understanding that the supernatural is for real, that good and evil exist. Some of the things that I experienced, why and how it worked, I wasn't aware, but I know that, when I hit this thing with holy water, it would move. Why that was the case, I don't know, but needless to say, I know I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone does, but I do know that evil exists and it can be prevailed to leave and be defeated eventually by good, by Jesus.
So you would say then, I'm guessing you made a conversion to Catholicism.
Well, I think I really had no choice. When you come, it's kind of like going to war. And people say, well, how did you have the courage to stay there? Because we had weapons. We had a faith, and we had things that we could utilize, whether it was prayers or rituals. It's one thing to, go into the woods and see a bear and run away from it, or go when you have a rifle, you're not as intimidated. And we had weapons that eventually did work, and our prayers worked, and the rituals that we employed worked, and eventually this thing was prevailed upon to leave the house.
Same question about your family. I asked you about how it changed you, your wife, and your 4 children. How how has everyone turned out as a result of the experience?
Well, I think in the same way, from the standpoint of we know that this stuff is for real and it exists. Now, the mental situation of my family and my children, my boys are all adults now. They're all fine. Our grandkids sleep here in the house, and everything is good, copacetic. But we know what happened here and what we went through. Another thing I would point out, and this is in the book, what we found out a very strong weapon against this evil. And you can remember 10 years ago all the controversy over the movie The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's movie. Mm-hmm. We played that movie in our house for over 6 months straight, nonstop. And this thing could not stand that movie. Would turn off the TV, would turn off the player, would take it out of the DVD player. As we verified, all the stuff you read in the Bible, the struggle between the devil and God is all real, and the devil can't stand the sight of the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ on the cross.
That movie, and I was actually living in Pittsburgh at the time when we went to see it. I remember walking out of the movie and was so gripped by it. I remember turning to my wife and saying, "I will never watch that movie again. I'm going to watch that movie one time. I will never watch it again." It was that powerful.
Yeah, I can tell you that I watched that movie so many times, in that bedroom, saying the rosary, and, this movie was playing continuously. We just put it on repeat, and it played, and it played. My wife at one point even put a mirror in front of the TV, so there was no place in the room you could be and not see what was being depicted.
I almost get the impression, maybe I'm not accurate on this, but I get the impression from you that rather than run from this, you actually sort of just dug in and said, "By God, I'm going to beat you."
Army fight.
Well, people ask all the time, "Why didn't you just leave?" Well, yeah. I'm not up to being forced out of my house, and being forced out by anything. And we determined we were going to stay. We had the faith. We had the belief that ultimately this thing would be prevailed upon to go. But I think most importantly, what were we going to do? We owned this problem. It was ours, and I wasn't going to hand it off to any other family like it was handed off to us. So, yeah, we just had to knuckle down and persevere. Now, there was a time, as I said, when we thought we were done. I wasn't sure what we were going to do with the house. But we persevered, and eventually we were victorious not through our own courage, but through the power of God.
Hang on a second there, Bob. We'll do a final minute and tell people where they can get the book right after this. It's 9:57. Sure. Bob Cranmer, our guest, the author, The Demon of Brownsville Road. Bob, tell our listeners where they can get the book.
Well, the publisher is Penguin, so it's available in all bookstores. Now in West Virginia, I'm not sure how many they would have. I know Pittsburgh stores have had a hard time keeping it in stock.
You get it on Amazon?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go on to BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, yeah. Google Books. Really, anyone that sells books, has it for sale.
All right. Hey, Bob,
the Demon of Brownsville Road.
Demon of Brownsville Road, Bob Cranmer, Cranmer. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
David, see you next week.